with that, we're gonna talk in the next 2 hours or so about a lot of different things that I've had the opportunity to learn over 40 years, to observe, to measure, to touch, to feel. Studies that we've done, we've had an opportunity to be a part of, and learning from other people, but learning from ranchers as we plan and monitor, and then, but we're measuring things. I want to really emphasize that this is quantitative measurements. It's not just qualitative observations. These are quantitative measures, because sometimes we get fooled on what we're looking at. And not only that, it isn't a one-time thing. It's over many measurements, many times, and reproducing the same results. And not just in one location, but spatially. Because anybody who's in research knows that, yes, you got to have so many measurements to get some statistical validity, but you also have to have spatial replication, because where does it apply? And so we're going to talk about some of those things. We got 4 main topics that we're going to cover, and I want to do this because, and give you a roadmap, because there's going to be a lot of stuff, and people are going to go, oh man, that's overwhelming. Well, keep in mind this framework, and those are the main things that you want to glob onto. Because if you're like me, I need to hear things 5 or 6 times before it really sinks in. So don't feel bad about that, but we do need to look at the complexity too, or otherwise we're going to miss how we might come up with solutions to solve problems. So the 4 main topics that we're going to discuss are the 4 biological laws. These laws are like they're like the physical laws of nature, like the laws of gravity. You can't get around them. If you step up a cliff, what happens? You fall. We all know that. That's a law. It's going to happen. You can't violate. You're not going to levitate or something. Right? It's a law. You can't get around it. Well, these biological laws are laws that you can't get around. So drought and weed resistance is a concept that I like to talk about a lot, because they really are keys to profitability and sustainability, and we'll talk about that. And we'll illustrate it. And then we're going to do a grazing land productivity demonstration and plant ID, and that's right here. Now, the plant ID will be quick, and we're not going to get in a lot of detail on that, but we're going to talk about what all these plants represent up here and what they mean to you economically, what they mean to you environmentally as far as the weed resistance of your land, the health of your land, mineral cycling, nutrient cycling, yes, big time. Water cycling, huge, huge, okay? So we'll demonstrate the scientific principles that we're going to discuss and go over in the first topic that we're going to address. So what are the plants telling you? There are so many different plants that God has made, and they all have different uses and different things that the animals know about, because they have a feedback mechanism. We're going to talk about that and how they select out on the landscape. These are things that back in the early 80s, I didn't know these things. And then when we observed many ranchers, myself, observing how animals selected plants, and you wonder, why are they changing the plants from year to year, and even the locations in a pasture that they graze? Okay, well, that's that feedback mechanism, and that really has only been proven by science in more recent years. And then your plants are your real crop. We're going to talk about that. We're going to look at animal and grazing land nutrition. This is huge. It's powerful. And as I mentioned, there's plants. God's made different plants that provide different nutrients in different amounts, in different seasons, and it even alters between years, because rainfall patterns alter, see? So all of this is an ever-changing thing that you have to try to manage for. So your harvesting and marketing mechanism, that is the animals. Are your animals fitting your forage quality environment? And I'm not just talking about whether you're grazing sheep or horses or cattle or goats. I'm talking about even with your cattle, your livestock. How are you breeding them? Think about this. If I'm going to go out and harvest hay, I've got to get my equipment ready, right? And what are we going to get? We're going to get a swather, make sure it's ready to go for haying season, minimize breakdowns so we can get the maximum quality harvested and quantity. And then I got to have my balers ready and all that. But what if my crop is a little different? What if my crop is actually potatoes? Well, I'm not going to use, the same kind of equipment to harvest it. So I have to look at that. Well, think about that, or corn, let's say corn. So think about that in terms of your animals. And we'll discuss that and give parameters on that. And what are the plants, what plants provide what nutrients and when? Okay, this is super important. Often we're spending money to, to kick ourselves in the shin. We're taking out plants, and I'm going to give you illustrations. And over all these years, many years, how people just sitting where you are at in different ranching seminars have come up to me afterward and says, geez, and these guys are like in their late 70s, maybe early 80 ranchers, and they're telling me, man, I got to stop spraying that. Okay? And I'll give you some illustrations. And are the weeds I'm killing really weeds? That's exactly it. Are they really weeds? And I'm not talking about targeted grazing and maybe Kathy Voth stuff about trying to get our livestock to graze the weeds. I'm talking about plants that your livestock, when you leave here today, really need. They really need it. And we'll talk about it from a nutritional standpoint. And then finally, and this will be kind of strewn throughout because we're limited on time today, but this is the question that over 40 years, planning hundreds and hundreds of ranches and tens of thousands of acres of land, the ranchers want to know, or a landowner wants to know of any sort, because we have various goals for landowners, different goals. Is my land healthy? Is my land healthy? It's a great question. And boy, this is where ecological site descriptions or knowing the potential of a pasture based on soil water holding capacity is important to know, because that tells you about potential. Because water, as we're going to discuss, is a limiting nutrient. And if not, if the land is not healthy, the next question is, can I improve it? Can I improve it? And then finally, if I can improve it, if that's possible, how do I do it, and how much will it cost? So, those 4 questions are what every landowner wants to know. Now, they may verbalize it in a different way, but that's really what they want to know. Okay, harvesters and marketers of your crop. Cattle, sheep. And by the way, to help me, how many of you raise cattle? Okay, so quite a few. Sheep. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about sheep. We're going to be more focused on the cattle end, but they cross over. There's a lot of similarities, both ruminants. So livestock, that's what we're going to focus on as our harvesting and marketing mechanism. Now, I have to emphasize this because it's very important how we view things. Now, there's other things, animals that harvest significant amounts of forage off of our ranges and our pastures. Mule deer can do that. There's a lot of overlap between mule deer diets and sheep. So, because some people maybe even just managing for elk, and there's a lot of overlap between cattle and elk. Although elk are opportunistic, northern Idaho, they have a little bit different diet than what they might have in Montana because of opportunity and availability. But any livestock will do that also. But they are adaptable, but there is a lot of overlap. Antelope, a lot of overlap between sheep and antelope. Then there's other things. There's birds, like the Hungarian partridge and other upland game birds, non-game birds, but they need some forages for sure, and that affects insects and all that. And then bighorn sheep. Now the bighorn sheep are limited because generally good habitat is going to be within 100 to 300 yards of escape cover. That's cliffs and steep rock. So those are the areas that we focus in on. If someone's wanting to augment their bighorn sheep, they've got to look at those areas, find the escape cover, and then manage around those areas. Now I can tell you, I've been involved with some of that in places, and like on the Forest Service, you look at these areas and all of these prime grazing areas are being encroached by what? Timber. Forest. And then they're wondering why we keep working on all these weeds, and they do studies and all this and that because weeds seem to be just increasing. Well, they don't have much open habitat within that 100 to 300 yards to escape cover. See, those are vital areas. So if that's somebody's goal, they better look at that. And lions also can predate on those when that encroachment of those trees. They can sneak up on those bighorn sheep a lot easier. Okay, so now how about bison? Yes, we're going to talk maybe briefly. There's different nutritional things between bison and domestic cattle, but a lot of the differences sometimes get really exaggerated as far as how they utilize the range. But we'll talk about that. But some people may be, and I've worked with bison operators, just bison are a little bit, they are wild. But with our domesticated herds, we call those wild cows, so generally, depending on where you're at. But yes, wild horses or just horses. They definitely are users of our forage. But we're going to focus in on our livestock, our cattle and sheep. And yes, there is goats, but it isn't, I know you guys have some goats, but does anyone else have goats? Yeah, see, so goats is not a big deal in Montana. And I have to say, on the hierarchy of species, cattle are here as far as the quality of the range that they need. They need better quality range. As it deteriorates just a little bit, sheep are really good because they need a higher amount of forbs in their diet, in their intake, and we'll talk about why that is. Oh, then you get down to goats. Now goats, like in the Middle East, where they've been grazing for thousands of years, you have a lot of deteriorated range. And we're going to talk about thresholds and that sort of thing, but though they can take gnarly stuff, stuff with thorns and really high fiber, not real leafy, and they can utilize that stuff that you wonder, how can they even graze that and not cut up their mouths? But goats can. So they're kind of down here as far as, not that the animal is, depends on the individual if you like goats or not, but they're kind of down here as far as what kind of range quality and the quality of the plants that they can still utilize. That's why they're really good in taking out weeds and things like that. And sheep can do some of that too. So with that, let's get into this. We can look at pieces of ground and ask, why is that different on that side of the fence than this side of the fence? Now, someone might say right here, oh, well, they graze that side. Well, no, there's a more difference than that because you have to look closer, okay? But why is it different? Well, these laws that we're going to talk about will help to explain what you're seeing. And it's important to understand this.